Brethren, it is now my honour and privilege to introduce you to our Programme Master, Most Worshipful Brother, Raymond John Smith. Ray's Masonic journey commenced in 1965 when he was initiated into Libertas Secunda Lodge, number 6433 in Gravesend in the province of Kent, after having been proposed by his father and seconded by his brother, sadly both of whom have passed to the Grand Lodge above. Ray's main craft is now in the St. Albans Lodge, number 29. Ray was appointed a Grand Steward in the year 2000, followed by being appointed to Assistant Grand Director of Ceremonies in 2006, and then promoted to Past Grand Sword Bearer in 2018. After 10 years in the craft, Ray took his first steps into our wonderful progressive orders. He was advanced into Robinson Mark Lodge in Kent in 1975, but following a move to London for work, Ray's mark is almost exclusively now based there. Ray went on to be exalted into the Holy Royal Arch Chapter in Pentagonal Chapter, East Kent in 1984. But as mentioned previously, before retiring, Ray's work was in London, so his Holy Royal Arch was mainly with the St. Albans Chapter number 29, which now meets in Mark Mason's Hall. He was appointed Past Grand Standard Bearer in 2013 and promoted to Past Grand Sojourner in 2018. In the Mark, Ray's first appointment was to Grand Steward in 1993. He was then appointed to the Mark General Board in 2004 and as the Provincial Grand Master for London in 2007. Ray was also President of the Mark Benevolent Fund in 2011 and was invested as Pro Grand Master in 2017. In the Ancient and Accepted Rite, Ray was conferred to the 33rd degree in 2019. As you can imagine, brethren, Ray is a member of all the orders administered from Mark Mason's Hall, plus the Rose Choir in Duke Street. In his later working life, Ray was appointed Assistant Secretary to the Royal Masonic Institution for Girls in 1984 and continued in that role following the amalgamation of the RMIG and the RMBI into the Masonic Trust for Girls and Boys. In 1988, he took up the position of CEO at the Whitgift Foundation in Croydon until retiring in 2009. A proud husband, father, and grandfather, Ray is married to Anne with 2 children. Ray's daughter, who lives in Jersey, is a solicitor by profession, but currently a full-time mum looking after the wants and needs of her 4 children. Ray's son, who lives in Weybridge, works in IT and is engaged. He would have been married in November this year. However, lockdown sadly postponed that, but it has been rearranged for next year, November. Ray has enjoyed active sports since his school days, but in later years with 2 knee replacements, this is somewhat limited, but he enjoys watching sports on TV, rugby in particular. Until lockdown, Ray played a little indoor tennis. In normal times, Anne and Ray spend as much time as they can staying with their family in Jersey, where, as you can imagine, their 4 young grandchildren keep them busy, fit, and each evening exhausted. Brethren, this is just a mere snippet into the life of our Programme Master. His passion, kindness, and dedication is infectious and an inspiration to us all. Ray, along with his wonderful team, leads from the front and epitomizes what it means to be a Freemason. Programme Master, Most Worshipful Brother, Raymond John Smith, the virtual floor is yours, sir. You may have to take yourself off mute.
How's that? Does that work, Ameet?
That's perfect.
Can you hear me?
Coming through loud and clear.
I'll start again, Ameet. Thank you. And thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And can I first respond by saying to you and the team, what a wonderful thing Freemasons Without Borders is. It's been fascinating seeing it develop during COVID and ever increase in its popularity. It has filled such an important role in not only keeping us united, it has expanded the knowledge of all of us who have watched the talks, and the number of Freemasons have said to me the simple words, I just did not know that. Your platform, Zoom, and other IT communications that have come into their own during lockdown have been absolutely invaluable. When COVID is something in the past, these methods of keeping us informed, banded together, and for many the feelings that we have not been forgotten, will have a very important place in our Freemasonry in the years ahead. The regular attending members of our lodges will return, but it is those who perhaps, for very good reason, don't attend every meeting, that communications like Zoom or Freemasons Without Borders will have such an important part to play to ensure we retain them as members. They are all our brothers in Masonry, and every one of them is important. Please develop what you have. It has a real future. I know Mark Grand Lodge and the Province of London, about whom I am now about to say a few words, will give you all the support that we can. I am unsure how I came to be your speaker tonight. It seems on reflection that I was part of an Ashbolt-Quinn conspiracy. It was like playing a game of musical chairs, but one in which Ashbolt and Quinn had already sat down before allowing me to start. No doubt I was the last one standing. But the province's London is where I've enjoyed many years of wonderful Masonic fulfillment. And it is a great honour to now be speaking briefly about the last 30 years since the province was constituted. I must preface this presentation by saying I am neither a historian or an academic scholar. So what I have to say is my own understanding of the 30 years since the Mark Province of London was constituted. It may not be factually correct in every detail. 30 years is a long time, and for many of you, even London Mark 20 years ago may not be familiar to you. I'm greatly indebted to Brian Vickers for his publication on the Province of London. Many of the details in this talk have been taken from his booklets. Since the Grand Lodge of Mark Master Masons was formed in June 1856, London Mark Masonry had been administered by Grand Lodge. Like the craft, London, being centred around Grand Lodge, was easy to administer, and with a modest number of lodges in London, most of the members would have been personally known to each other, and more importantly, to the Grand Secretary. Whilst in those early days, the number of lodges was small, they grew steadily over the following decades, and it became more impractical for Grand Lodge to administer lodges a distance away, travel being far more difficult then than it is today. The necessity to administer became localized, and it was soon apparent that the format established by Craftmark provinces should be followed. Mark provinces were constituted, Devonshire and Surrey in 1857, and Leicestershire and Rutland a year later in 1858, with Cornwall and other provinces quickly following. But London remained under the administration from Grand Lodge. Jumping quickly over the next 100 years or so, by 1990, the number of Mark lodges in London had reached 95. Together with over 60 Royal Mariner lodges and the many units in the other orders all administered from Mark Mason's Hall, the burden of administration must have been huge. There can be no doubt the Grand Secretary and the staff in Mark Mason's Hall must have been feeling the pressure. Mark Masonry in London in 1990 had no administrative structure as exists in a provincial Grand Lodge. There was no provincial Grand Master, no executive, no provincial ranks. After the chair of your Mark Lodge, you would in time have qualified for promotion to London Mark Grand Rank, and then if successful, to Mark Grand Rank. There were no provincial deacons, overseers or wardens. Having myself been a provincial Grand Secretary, I can only begin to imagine the workload that fell upon Grand Lodge, not only administering the Mark, but all the other orders. In 1990, Peter Glyn Williams was Grand Secretary, and I believe an economist by profession. He would have played a major part in bringing before the General Board the proposal to create London a province, responsible for its own administration and with the provincial structure that we are familiar with today. Once that decision had been confidentially taken, there would probably have followed a series of discreet lunches. A small circle of the Grand Master's advisors would have determined the first major decision. Who would be the first provincial Grand Master? With that decided, what probably followed was a series of phone calls to various people from the Grand Secretary. Perhaps a lunch invitation, with the real reason for the lunch not disclosed until coffee was being served. Similar to being summoned for a disciplinary, except then you don't receive a lunch. The final decision to create the Provincial Grand Lodge of London must have been made late in 1989 or early in 1990. For at the meeting of Grand Lodge in June 1990, the Most Worshipful Grand Master announced that the Very Worshipful Brother Harry Cazenove had accepted his invitation to be the first Provincial Grand Master for the new province of London. Whilst at the time this received much applause, I understand that in the weeks that followed, there were mixed views on the proposal, but a little more about that in a minute or so. The momentum had begun, and following more discreet lunches of the sort I have mentioned, the executive was selected and planning commenced. I believe the executive agreed that the first officers should pay for their own provincial collars and jewels and a fee of honour, with a cost for the chain and jewels of £388.57 each. Among those first officers was Brian Vickers, appointed as an assistant provincial Grand Master, and who continued to serve the province for the longest of all. John Brackley was the first provincial Grand Secretary, and as we know, he later became the Grand Secretary. Tim Lewis was the first Grand Treasurer, going on to be the third provincial Grand Master, before also being appointed the Grand Secretary on the retirement of Peter Glyn Williams. The mixed views I mentioned were from those who said it just would not work. In later years, despite the undoubted success of London Mark, similar views were expressed about the formation of Metropolitan Grand Lodge in the craft before its constitution in 2003, and that had also been a great success. There was a need in London Mark for the stronger lodges to help the weak ones, of which there were a number who had reached the stage of being ready to surrender their warrants. Some of the lodges were desperately small, with little prospect of recruiting new members. Would a provincial structure provide the miracle needed? Only time would tell. Monday, the 19th of November 1990, was to be the great day. The Most Worshipful Grand Master presided, and the Provincial Grand Lodge of London was constituted, and 30 years of successful Mark Masonry has followed. Reflecting back, if there was any doubt about the effectiveness of making London a province, I can tell you that in the first 10 years of its existence, only one Royal Ark Mariner Lodge surrendered its warrant. One or two other lodges agreed to dine together or hold joint meetings, but 3 new Mark Grand Lodges and 9 Royal Ark Mariner Lodges were formed. Sadly, it was only a few months after the formation of the province that the Provincial Grand Master Harry Cazenove fell ill whilst on holiday. And on the 30th of July, he lost his fight against cancer and died peacefully at his home. Dr. John Pascoe Williams, the Deputy Provincial Grand Master, became the Deputy in charge. It was during these early months of the province that brethren were offered the opportunity to exchange their London Mark Grand rank for a provincial rank, or indeed remain as holders of their London Mark Grand rank. Almost all wished to have the opportunity to display the regalia of the new Provincial Grand Lodge. Even to the doubters, the offer to exchange London Mark Grand rank for perhaps a Provincial Grand Senior Warden was just too hard to resist. Speculation now mounted about who would be appointed the new second Provincial Grand Master. By mid-September 1991, we all knew. It was to be Rowington Berger Frangi Kambata, a well-known and highly respected and experienced Freemason, exceptionally wise and astute. Rowington Kambata was installed on Wednesday, the 30th of October, 1991, and with it came wholesale changes. The entire executive, with the exception of Brian Vickers, was replaced. Appointed was Tim Lewis as Deputy Provincial Grand Master, and the assistants were Brian Vickers, Barry Clark, David Ivor Williams, and Harry Gould. I was not close enough to the decision makers to understand why so many changes were made. Many rumours were circulating, but maybe it's just best not to know. I've mentioned the experience and wisdom of the new Provincial Grand Master, and this was quickly demonstrated. He set up various committees to strengthen the administration. Meetings with secretaries, scribes followed, and became regular events. The annual meeting moved to June, as the provincial Grand Master regarded October as having weather too miserable for the province to meet. Rowington Gambetta was determined to be inclusive. He introduced, as part of the opening of Provincial Grand Lodge, the opening by the chaplains of the respective faiths of 6 volumes of the Sacred Law. This continues to this day and meets with the universal approval of our multi-ethnic membership. The foundations of the Provincial Grand Lodge we know today were formed. At that meeting in June 1992, provincial music was introduced. The last post and reveille were played by a lone trumpeter in honour of those called to the Grand Lodge above. Abide with me was sung with gusto, with the organ and brass band playing. It was indeed, for those times, a very different provincial meeting. The Brotherly Love Committee was formed, and the Desmond Bowditch Purse, now presented annually to the Lodge, who has best supported charity during the year, was named after Desmond, who was the first chairman of that committee. The final repayment of loans granted to set up the province, in the sum of 2,500, was repaid to Grand Lodge. Other loans from Grand Master's Lodge and the Grand Steward Lodge had previously been repaid. The province was now free of debt. Towards the end of that meeting in 2002, John Brackley, the Provincial Grand Secretary, announced that he would be retiring from that office, and one Raymond John Smith would succeed him. That began the most amazing time in my Masonic life. I had a wonderful relationship with the Provincial Grand Master. Lunch at his Chelsea house most Wednesdays, when Darby, Rowington's charming and delightful wife, would cook lunch, and what an amazing cook she was. Rowington would talk for far too long about his ideas and thoughts for the province. Inspirational they all were. It was such a privilege to be able to join him on that journey. He was most certainly my mentor, and I remain indebted to him for the experience. At a time when computers were only just arriving on the scene, and emails just didn't exist, being provincial secretary was a laborious manual exercise. In the weeks before the provincial meeting, my children's games room with the table tennis table opened out was laid up to represent the Connaught Hotel dining room, and my children were banned from going anywhere near it. Communications to members and the distribution of yearbooks was manually prepared and sent via Royal Mail. How different communication is today. Zoom was a word most of us have never heard of 12 months ago. Today it is the norm. Times and experiences change, and in the main it is usually for the best, although we naturally think back and say, I remember how good it was then. Tim Lewis, the Deputy Provincial Grand Master, had been appointed Grand Master of the Order of the Allied Masonic Degrees, so had to stand down. And David Ivor Williams was appointed Deputy Provincial Grand Master. The Provincial Communications Committee was established under the chairmanship of Mac Ross of St John's Wood Lodge. How good Mac was at getting the members of that lodge to work so hard. Mac had the ideas and the members did the work. Mac was a great friend, and St John's Wood a wonderful ally for a Provincial Grand Secretary to have at his disposal. Although the province was new, among its member lodges were some of the oldest. On Accord and Old Kent are both time immemorial lodges, formed before the Grand Lodge of Master Masons. Following the establishment of the province, I think Tuscan Lodge number 454 was the first centenary, followed by Ethical 458, and for both the executive were rolled out in force. Delegations have been introduced and were highly successful and have continued to be so to this day. Social events like Christmas parties took place, orchestrated by the Provincial Grand Director of Ceremonies, Brian Wareham, ably assisted by his deputy, John Knox. Whenever I doubted some of Rowington Gambatta's innovations, Brian was always the positive one and made dreams a reality. In 1996, La France Marque Lodge celebrated its centenary at the Café Royal. It is the only French-speaking mark lodge in the UK. Proceedings are conducted in French, and on that evening, the provincial Grand Master conducted the ceremony in excellent French. Today we have sponsored shavings and haircuts, but I think the first sponsored event in the province was by a real character, one Ken Ackrell, who did a sponsored slim, allegedly slimming from over 23.5 stone to under 20. The Ackrell Slim Fund helped establish the Brotherly Love Charity Fund. I mentioned the beginning of the introduction of computers. In 1994, work commenced on the provincial database. The province was just beginning to settle down when another surprise arrived. Raymond Gambetta announced his forthcoming retirement as a provincial Grand Master, as he wished to return to Pakistan to take up a medical appointment. Tim Lewis was appointed to succeed him, and he was installed in September 1994. The Communications Committee introduced the Welcome Pack, which I'm pleased to note continues today. There can be nothing more welcoming to a new advancee into the marked degree than to receive a special welcome in this format. Something to take home after the meeting to read, to enjoy, and I think these days it even comes with a provincial tie. Euclid Mark Lodge was consecrated in June 1995 by the Provincial Grand Master. Probably one of the most enjoyable Mark meetings I have ever attended was as a guest to Euclid Mark Lodge, some years after its consecration, when the current Provincial Grand Registrar was advanced. Not only superb ritual, but an element of mischief and fun, characteristics that for me make the Mark degree so very enjoyable. More unexpected surprises were in store at the provincial meeting in 1996, when Tim Lewis announced that he also was retiring as Provincial Grand Master to take up the appointment of Grand Secretary. 3 Provincial Grand Masters gone in 6 years. David Ivor Williams, Deputy in Charge, was installed as the 4th Provincial Grand Master in January 1997, and then followed a very necessary period of consolidation, as David Ivor remained as Provincial Grand Masters for 10 years, during which time the province was well and truly established. The provincial officers first met in 1997 with a luncheon party at the Victory Services Club. Until COVID, this very popular and successful provincial mess continued to meet twice a year, more recently once at lunchtime and once an evening meeting. It has welcomed so many excellent speakers, both male and female, talking on a wide variety of subjects. If any member of the province of London listening to this evening have never attended the mess, do so. It is something you'll never regret. The annual Burn Supper first took place in 1996, and they have continued annually ever since, more recently in Bournemouth, which has proved to be a very popular destination and a wonderful weekend away. I first became aware of our current Provincial Grand Master Tom Quinn at the Burns Weekend down in Bournemouth, when one John Knox, who used to compare the Burns evenings, arranged for Tom and his wife Eunice to sing some Gilbert and Sullivan. Such a hit were they that they have been stars of every London provincial Burns supper since that evening. I think that was the same evening I first wore a kilt, and by a rigged vote won the best knees competition. With the military band background of David Ivor Williams, now the Provincial Grand Master, it will be no surprise that music at the annual provincial meeting came to feature almost a full orchestra, and this is now a major part of every London provincial meeting. The music theme continued into the new millennium. In 2000, when at the annual provincial meeting, the commanders of the Royal Mariner Lodges in the province processed in to the tune of Rule Britannia, followed by a procession of visiting PGMs and our own retired PGMs to the tune of the Grand March from Verdi's opera Aida. Processions into Provincial Grand Lodge are now a spectacle at each meeting, and they are not only a joy to watch, they make the meeting so inclusive, something the province has become very good at. Every member is and feels a part of it. As I have said, the province settled down to some stability under David Ivor Williams. The flurry of centenaries continued, and Bon Accord celebrated its 150th anniversary in November 2001. It was an occasion where not only was Grand Lodge well represented by the Deputy Grand Master, Right Worshipful Brother Ted Smart, who attended along with two very distinguished brethren from the Grand Royal Arch Chapter of Scotland, in recognition of Bon Accord's roots in Scotland before the formation of the Grand Lodge of Mark Master Masons of England and Wales and its districts and lodges overseas. I've mentioned that the social life around Mark Masonry in London expanded and was enjoyed in its different forms. My lasting memory is a provincial party with Brian Vickers playing the keyboard and Brian Wareham and Jack Cohen, two past provincial Grand Directors of Ceremonies, entertaining us with Flanagan and Alan Numbers. Oh, such lovely memories. At the provincial meeting in 2002, those present were informed that 3 lodges that had until then been part of the province were leaving. The Grand Master's Lodge, the Grand Steward's Lodge, and the Mark Provincial Grand Secretary's Lodge would now be deemed to be unattached. This matter had for some time been a battle between the Provincial Grand Master, who wished to retain these 3 large, important lodges, and Grand Lodge. On this occasion, the province lost the battle. In these first 20 years of the province, 2 names will be so well known to those of you who were members at that time: Mac Ross and Erwin Obadiah. In 2005, Mac, who I mentioned earlier as the taskmaster of St. John's Wood Lodge, celebrated 50 years in Freemasonry. And Erwin Obadiah was presented with the Provincial Grand Master's Award for services to the province for his long and sterling service as provincial Tyler. The province has always been willing and ready to think outside of the box, provided it was for the good of the order. The orchestra at provincial meetings, the processions and the delegations. And in 2002, on the retirement of Brian Vickers as Deputy Provincial Grand Master, to take up an appointment as Group Chairman in the newly formed Metropolitan Grand Lodge of London, he recessed out of the Grand Temple, accompanying the Provincial Grand Master, a fitting tribute to someone who had been an integral part of the province since day one. The 26th of October 2006 will be remembered by some of you as the day Grand Lodge of Mark Master Masons celebrated 150 years since its founding. The province organised a party for members and their partners at the Royal National Hotel to follow the formal celebration of Grand Lodge at the Albert Hall. Over 400 attended the party, with our own Roger de Courcy entertaining. And once again, Brian Vickers was on the keyboard, and the Wareham-Cohen duo once again took the Flanagan and Allen spot. The consecration of Prudence and Verity Lodge of Royal Ark Mariners in November 2006 was one of the last official engagements of David Ivor Williams as Provincial Grand Master. David Ivor Williams had dedicated the last 10 years to consolidating the province, and with the teams that evolved during these years, to improving all aspects of the administration and communication within it. On the 8th of February 2007, I was installed as the 5th Provincial Grand Master, and what an honour that was. Roy Bedford had kindly agreed to stay on as my deputy until the annual meeting in July. In July, with over 600 present, I appointed David Ashbolt to be my deputy and Paul Muston to be the Provincial Grand Secretary. How fortunate was I? 2 more dedicated hard workers I could not have asked for, and what friends both of them became. Highlights came thick and fast. One of my great joys was the consecration of Equator Lodge in November 2007. Among the members were Charty Patney and Jagdish Dahlia, who also became such good friends. Sadly, neither are still with us. It was a few years later in 2010 that Jagdish organised a visit for members of the province to the Sikh temple in Hounslow. Russell Race, Then the Metropolitan Grand Master accompanied a good number of us on that visit, where we were made so very welcome. Multicultural province of London at its very best. Equator Lodge followed this up with the consecration of the Royal Ark Mariner Lodge in 2009, when among the guests was the Deputy District Grand Master for East Africa, who had made a special journey to be present. Jumping back to 2008, we welcomed Peter Nelson, the Provincial Grand Master for Somerset. Somerset had for some time had a travelling keystone, which passed between lodges, encouraging intervisiting. And Peter had agreed to visit our province to launch our keystone at a meeting of London West Africa Lodge. The keystone had been made by myself, and I believe miraculously lasted in the province for some years. I hope that on my advancement I made a better job in the quarries than I did with the wood in my garage workshop. At the 150th anniversary celebrations of Grand Lodge at the Albert Hall, Bon Accord Lodge and Old Kent Lodge, along with the other time immemorial lodges, have been presented with sesquicentenary banners. And for the first time, a custom that I believe continues, these were first processed into Provincial Grand Lodge in 2008. At this provincial meeting, attendance was almost 1,000. The province, now 18 years old and getting stronger. Stronger in many ways, and in no small measure, due to the work undertaken by Richard Ferro, who had been the Provincial Grand Treasurer for 17 years. Richard Ferro had done sterling work, never one to be generous with provincial funds, careful with every penny, and what a fine balance sheet he passed on to Stephen Fenton, our Treasurer to this time. Stephen has inherited the attributes of his predecessor. It is equally difficult to have him spend money, unless he is convinced of its merits. What more could a province ask for? It was in 2009, following a ruling from Grand Lodge, that the past Assistant Provincial Grand Masters and past Deputy Provincial Grand Masters were granted permission to wear a collarette and jewel, recognising their past provincial rank. And it was this meeting in 2009 that 11 collarettes were presented. Enough about my tenure, except to say that I was privileged to consecrate 3 Mark Lodges and 5 Royal Ark Mariner Lodges before handing over in 2011 to my then Deputy David Ashford, who was installed as Provincial Grand Master in 2011. Whoever recommended David bears a great responsibility, for there followed a number of terrible years for members of the province. The new Provincial Grand Master soon demonstrated his incredible ability to extract your last penny while unashamedly smiling and then allocating it to his latest charitable appeal. During David's 8 years as Provincial Grand Master, he was always on the front line and probably made more lodge visits than his predecessors together. He consecrated 11 Mark Lodges and 5 Royal Ark Mariner Lodges, while still collecting funds from us all. Some £300,000 was raised, with this amazing sum so generously donated by the lodges and the members of the province. It was enough to buy 7 minibuses for the RMBI care homes, also 2 blood bikes for the North Surrey and London Brigade, and many thousands were raised for our own Mark Benevolent Fund. For the Mark Benevolent Fund, all lodges in the province attained a level of honorific, including a large number of Grand Patron Diamond and Gold awards. The generosity of the members was and continues to be simply outstanding. Time does not allow me to go into great detail about all that was achieved during David's period as Provincial Grand Master, but I cannot move on without mentioning that at the Provincial Grand Master's request, well over 70 large and mini axes were made by Charlie Newman at his own expense. These were presented as acknowledgement for lodges reaching their appeal totals. These axes continue to be used in most lodges in the province, and also in some other lodges outside the province, who succumbed to the pressure from the Provincial Grand Master to support his appeal. When I retired as Provincial Grand Master, I moved on to a role in the Mark Benevolent Fund, and David Ashbolt has done the same after he retired. Tom Quinn was installed in 2019. He was already making his mark in his own way, I know Tom has had many of his plans disrupted by COVID, not least the celebratory dinner that had been planned to mark the 30-year anniversary of this province. That cancellation is, I understand, the reason why I'm speaking with you this evening. By the very nature of a province, much of this talk has been centered around provincial grandmasters. A province is very much more than this. It comes back to the fundamental reason for the establishment of a province. It is for a provincial grandmaster to nurture his team. The success of that team is the success of a province. There is a place on that team for everyone. That place may be as a member of the lodge, where its success depends on your attendance and your involvement at whatever level. It may be as master of your lodge, where leadership, attention to detail, and the building of your own team is paramount. Attention to detail means not just the business of the lodge on the night of the meeting, but nurturing your members, those unable to attend, finding out why, and making sure that person is warmly welcomed and encouraged to be at the next meeting. Just one member lost is a tragedy. Within Provincial Grand Lodge, there are so many roles to play. Not everyone can be honoured to be appointed Provincial Grand Master. Indeed, not everyone would wish to. But whatever part, just attending is important and makes our province of London the successful and happy organisation it is. This province is most fortunate to have the highest proportion of Royal Ark Mariner lodges to Mark lodges. Perhaps the main reason for this is that most units, both Mark and the Royal Ark Mariners, meet on the same evening, and this is not so throughout all the country. I would also suggest that the Royal Ark Mariner degree is such a beautiful one, the ritual delightful. It is well worthy of your membership. The province has come a very long way since its constitution in 1990. I hope those responsible for the decision will feel it was not only the correct choice, but that those involved in its journey over the last 30 years have justified that decision. The achievements over these 30 years, I believe, speak for themselves, and the statistics clearly demonstrate that not only are our lodges stronger, the ritual better, and thus the ceremonies more enjoyable, all of which makes the choice of being a Mark Master Mason one I hope you will never regret. At this time of challenge, we need to display fortitude, resolve, and tenacity as never before, and our members have these characteristics in abundance. Once again, thank you to Freemasons Without Borders for organising this evening and for using in the flyer a photograph of me taken some years ago when I was much younger. When I was asked if I was happy with the flyer, I took one look at the photograph and quickly agreed. To Tom Quinn, our Provincial Grand Master, may your tenure give you less challenges than you've had to face in the last year. And to all those who have lasted throughout this talk, may I wish you and your families a happy festive season. Stay safe, keep well, and I hope it will not be long before we are able to resume our Freemasonry in the way that we've traditionally always done. And may God bless you all. Thank you.
Program Master, I'm sure there's going to be a round of applause by everybody for that. Thank you very much. Wonderful talk regarding a wonderful degree and something that's close to most of our hearts, I know, province of London. Thank you ever so much. If it's okay with you, we're going to bounce straight to the questions.
Yes.
That'd be great. I've got one for you here. Had a couple that came through. What does the day-to-day life of a program master look like?
Program master. Oh, I think no day, week or month is ever the same. I'm always in regular contact with the Deputy Grand Master, the Assistant Grand Master, and probably even more regular contact with our very hard-working Grand Secretary. I also work very closely with the Grand Treasurer and the Grand Director of Ceremonies. We're a very close team. We work well together and almost always, reach a consensus on decisions that we have to make. I'm a hands-on type of person, and I like to be kept informed about everything associated with the Mark and the Royal Ark Mariner. I like to be kept informed about the commercial side of Mark Mason's Hall, not least of all about our catering company. In the business sense, I suppose company chairman is the closest analogy I can give you. But for me, the greatest enjoyment and pleasure as Programme Master is visiting the provinces and lodges. I think there is no greater high than the pleasure of installing a new provincial Grand Master and sharing with him what is probably the highlight of his Masonic journey. Those meetings, the radiance from the members is just simply a pure joy. I'm not able to visit London lodges quite so often now, but when I do, I take great pleasure in an advancement ceremony well done. There are many members of the province of London who over the last 30 years I've seen being advanced, and I now see them in high offices and working hard within the province. And that gives me great satisfaction to think that I've been there with them as part of that journey. I won't mention his name, but I was approached after attending an advancement some years ago and asked by the newly advancee why he had not been presented with a proper marked token. An oversight by the lodge, I assume, but I subsequently sent him in the post a proper token, and he and I have been good friends ever since. A small gesture goes a long way. I think being Programme Master was something I never imagined would come to me, or indeed never thought about it. But somehow it did, and it's been a great pleasure, a huge honour, and I enjoy serving the order. I think that probably sums up how I feel about being Programme Master.
No, thank you very much. Really appreciate your honesty as well. I think we can probably do another talk on just what it's like to be the Programme Master. Next, could we go to Paul Rowlands? Hi, Paul.
Good evening, right, Most Worshipful Programme Master, and good evening, Right Worshipful Provincial Grand Master Tom. Most Worshipful Programme Master, question from Warwickshire. We here, the provincial team here in the Mark, also escort the Right Worshipful Provincial Grand Master to all RAM installations, etc. Whilst we have RAM Grand Rank and Provincial Grand Rank, we don't get to wear collar jewels, etc. for the Mark DC's jewels, because obviously we're not officially provincial DCs in the Royal Ark Mariner. Is this something that perhaps Grand Lodge could look at some stage?
Grand Lodge has looked at it many occasions, and I think it's probably run its course, and I can't imagine for the time being there will be any change when attending a Royal Ark Mariner degree. I hear what you're saying. I understand where it's coming from. It's been around for a while, but I think it's probably, as I say, probably run its course and is not likely to change in the near future. But I never say never.
Thank you, sir. But before I depart, can I just say we were chuffed to bits with the Grandmasters and obviously your involvement in the special award of Grand Ranks recently for those brethren who've done so much during the COVID pandemic, particularly for, obviously, we had Worship Brother Tony Ball honoured. Thank you. The brethren here really appreciate the fact that Grand Lodge have taken such a step.
I think Grand Lodge really appreciates the efforts, not just the 18 who received the Grand Master Special Award that contributed. Many others through the provinces contributed a great deal as well in supporting them. Those 18 will in due course receive a special certificate indicating the award as a special Grand Master's award. But I think we're hoping that that will be presented by the Grand Master himself to the 18 at the next time Grand Lodge is able to meet. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Could we go to another Paul now? Paul Greek. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Ameet, and thank you, Programme Master. I just wanted to ask you, there seems to be an overlap in the areas covered by London and Middlesex. And I just wondered if there was any sort of defined area where there's a cut-off, and if not, what determines whether a lodge goes into one province or the other?
I don't think there's anything particular. Some lodges in Kent and in Middlesex have traditionally met in London, while still being part of Middlesex or Kent, simply because it suited them to meet in London. There's no defined barriers, borders particularly. It's for historic reasons more than anything else. Nothing more than that. It's just the way the lodges have evolved, I think. I don't think there's any intention to change them. Where these lodges meet is something for them to decide. Having said that, we try to encourage lodges to meet within our provinces, but it's only encouragement. This is not a directive. And I think we feel if the lodge is happy where it is, then we don't see the need to change.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Ray, I think everybody's gone really shy because there's no.
I assure them I don't bite, absolutely.
Provincial Grand Master, would you like to come on?
In terms of what, asking a question or?
You would like?
I think I don't want to preempt anything which might be said, but I have enjoyed thoroughly this presentation. As an expatriate Scot and having perhaps some affiliation and affection for Bonaccord Lodge and its Scottish roots, I know the history of that lodge, and I'm so pleased that Bonaccord was one of the prime movers in creating the Mark Grand Lodge back in the 19th century. I feel myself very honoured, privileged, and in fact humble to be the 7th Provincial Grand Master in this succession of so many very distinguished brethren. And I'm so sorry that most of my tenure for the moment has been taken over by the COVID crisis. I've actually been the Provincial Grand Master in suspension and lockdown longer than I have been the Provincial Grand Master without it. Other than that, I'm very happy to continue and to try to make sure that when we come out of COVID, we come out stronger and with presentations as we've just had today, with an exhortation to keep the faith, and we know that we'll come out of this stronger. Then I'm looking forward very much to a successful future for the province. Thank you for your presentation, sir.
Pleasure, absolutely. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Provincial Grand Master. Brethren, as mentioned at the start of the talk, we will be having a special address by our Right Worshipful Brother Thomas Quinn shortly after the meeting has concluded. Program Master, I knew that would work because we've got some brethren who have woken up now. If we could please next go to Peter Brindle. Hi, Peter.
Good evening, Most Worshipful Grand Master, Program Master. I just wondered whether the Grand Lodge had started to take a view of what might happen when normality, whatever that may be, starts to return in terms of Zoom meetings. And what I mean by that is my Mark Lodge is quite small. It's also military, so people are scattered around, and we don't often get a great many at the meetings. But we've had a couple of Zoom meetings for committees and things recently, and they have been attended by everybody. And it strikes me that's a move for democracy, and the genie may be rather out of the bottle.
It's a very interesting question. It's been talked about. No final decisions have been made, but I think Zoom has a real role to play in our Freemasonry going forward. I think, as you said, it's an occasion when quite often almost 100% of the members attend. So I think it has a role to play, not necessarily a role within the ceremonial side of our lodges, but in keeping our members communicating with each other, in contact with each other. It has a very important role going forward. I think we've learned an awful lot from these platforms during this COVID period. Recently, when we were talking to the members who were being appointed to Royal Ark Mariner Grand Rank, I, together with the Deputy Grand Master and the Assistant Grand Master, spoke to almost every one of the recipients. And there was an 83-year-old I spoke to and had a wonderful conversation. And I asked him if he had had Zoom meetings with the members of his lodge. And he told me that he hadn't, because although he could send emails and open emails was his words, he hadn't managed to work out Zoom. But he promised me that he would get his granddaughter to come round and show him after I told him that how easy it was and that even I had managed it. And he promised me that once he'd mastered Zoom, he would ring me and tell me that he'd done so. I haven't had the call yet, but I will ring him again in a week or so's time to encourage him. And I think it's for those members, perhaps because of age or maybe pressure of work, that can't get to every meeting, that to have a communication between meetings or whatever, it will form a very important platform of communication. I won't go more specific than that, but it's very much a live subject for debate. And I'm sure that in the months ahead, there will be a directive coming out from Grand Lodge about the boundaries in which Zoom and other platforms can be used. But it's certainly going to have a place to play.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Peter. Next, could we go to a very dear friend and brother, Ted Jacobson in New York, please. Hi, Ted.
Hi, how are you?
Good evening, Ted.
I'm rather confused as a New Yorker master mason. I only know of one Grand Master in my state, and district Grand Masters, but we don't have the divisions that you have, and I need clarification. What is the prerequisite to become a mock master mason?
To have been a craft mason.
And who does that? It goes to the
United Grand Lodge of England.
United Grand Lodge of England. And is there any political or jurisdictional control by the UGLE to the mock master masons? Grand Lodge, the Grand Master, that is.
In craft masonry here in England, craft masonry consists of 3 degrees and 3 degrees only. I forget the exact terminology. And within that, it incorporates Royal Arch Masonry. But the mark is not recognized, or it's acknowledged but not formally recognized as part of craft masonry. And therefore, mark masonry in the UK is totally independent of UGLE. Whereas in Scotland, the mark degree is part of the 2nd degree in craft masonry.
I understand that, yes. With us, it's part of the Royal Arch. And you're Grand Master of the Royal Ox.
No.
Are they part of the Mock Master Mason's degree? Mock Master Grand Masters? I'm terribly confused, though I understand it all.
I think at some stage, maybe you and I can have a conversation between ourselves. But
I would love that.
I am very much a very keen and craft mason and a Royal Arch Mason. Both degrees I love very much indeed. But mark masonry is something alongside but independent of those 2 degrees. And any rank I have in mark masonry has nothing to do with craft or Royal Arch.
Well, thank you so much. I thought COVID was mixing me up enough. But I thank you for your explanation.
Thank you, Ted. Program Master, I believe that is all the questions we've had come.
Thank you, Ameet.
I suppose all that's left for me to say is on behalf of everyone, and I mean everyone on this call, our whole team at Freemasons Without Borders, thank you so much for giving us your time today. It has been an honor and a privilege, and we really, really do appreciate it, and hope that you can come on again maybe in 2021 in some capacity.
I'll have got better at musical chairs by then, Ameet. Take care, everyone.
Wonderful, thank you. Brother, if I could hand the virtual mic over to Right Worshipful Brother Thomas Quinn, our Provincial Grand Master for London.
Brethren, well, thank you so much for staying logged on and attending this additional session, which follows a most interesting, educational and enjoyable presentation by the Most Worshipful Pro-Grand Master. We all know what an exceptionally difficult year this has been for everyone, in their private and professional lives and in the world of Freemasonry too. For the Mark degree in London, many events which I and the executive had planned have had to be cancelled or postponed, and those that have gone ahead have had to be completely altered so that they could be achieved on a virtual basis. As I said in the London Mallet magazine, published only this weekend, thank goodness for Zoom, the new patron saint of Freemasonry. Apart from all the major functions which have been casualties of lockdown and suspension, have been the series of official visits to lodges by myself and the other chains, all of whom are in attendance on today's session. When we visit lodges in normal times, there are invariably special occasions to commemorate, new masters to be congratulated, newly advanced or elevated brethren to be welcomed. Very occasionally, there is a special anniversary to celebrate or a long service citation to be presented. There are also occasions when an individual brother's contribution to his lodge and the province are worthy of singling out for special mention. And that, if you are wondering what this session is all about, is why we are gathered together this evening. Worshipful Brother Mahir Kilic is of Turkish extraction and was the driving force and primus master for the formation of London's first Turkish-speaking Mark Lodge, Gallipoli, which consecrated its own Royal Ark Mariner Lodge barely 6 months later. Mahir was the primus commander and is now treasurer for both units. A second Turkish-speaking Mark Lodge, Namik Kemal, was consecrated shortly afterwards. Mahir, again the driving force, was the designated immediate past master. Both lodges deliver all their rituals in the Turkish language, the translation from English being funded by Mahir at his own expense. Worshipful Brother Mahir, now past Provincial Grand Junior Deacon, is a member of London's Installed Masters and Installed Commanders Lodges, Rontgen Portal Lodge, a founder of our Ralph Reeder Lodge, a scouting unit, and also Khalsa Lodge, which is dedicated to those who support Sikh morals and philosophy. He is that lodge's almoner, which is an appropriate office for him, for although possessed of a determined and forthright manner in business, he is renowned as a caring and benevolent man, and a brilliant example of all those Masonic qualities which transcend cultural and religious beliefs. His support for children's charities is well known, and when I gave him the opportunity to nominate the recipient of the recent provincial quiz night donations, he immediately asked that the funds go to the United Nations Relief Fund for Refugees. Most notably, in the current pandemic, he anticipated the desire of Masons to maintain their social contacts and their determination to make a daily advancement in Masonic knowledge. Mahir used his expertise in technology to launch on the 25th of April the Facebook group Freemasons Without Borders, which rapidly grew to over 2,700 members. He has led, resourced, and enthused a small team of friends to organize and promote scores of highly professional and relevant weekly Zoom lectures covering a broad range of subjects, including all of the progressive orders, where he has arranged for high-profile and highly respected expert speakers to participate, and which have attracted regular worldwide audiences, sometimes exceeding 500. London Mark Province also benefits from his support of large-scale Zoom sessions, and I am indebted to him for hosting the annual virtual meeting in July with over 500 brethren in attendance, including some 200 Tom Quinns. Our remembrance celebration on the 11th November and the provincial quiz last week were also facilitated and hosted by Mahir. Mahir, as a thank you from me personally and from our province, it gives me the greatest of pleasure to promote you to past Provincial Grand Master Overseer. This to take effect immediately. I have signed off a special certificate to commemorate this field promotion, and this should be with you in the course of the next few days.
Roger Grandmaster, I'm delighted what I heard. I'm speechless. Thank you very much for your kind presentation. Of course, I couldn't do this without the help of Ameet. Ameet being there always.
But Mahir and brethren, my thanks don't stop there with you. This province of London has been supported by another truly remarkable and, in Masonic terms, young brother in our midst, Brother Ameet Watts. He is by far one of the most hardworking and enthusiastic young Freemasons it has ever been my privilege and pleasure to know. Initiated into the Aldwych Lodge, number 3096, as recently as 2015, he's already been installed as Worshipful Master, and it was my honour to be present at that ceremony last year. And he has, of course, been exalted into chapter in 2019. It will come as no surprise to those who know him that he is a great enthusiast of his craft lodge's Lodge of Instruction, where he is an inspiration to younger brethren as a promoter of ceremony and ritual, and the creator of Lodge Pudding Nights, which seem to draw together younger members and potential candidates in regular social gatherings and virtual eat-ins. No doubt this conviviality stems from his professional life, where he is a business support manager in the hospitality industry, Marston's Brewing Company. Married to Samunda for some 15 years, Ameet, you have a daughter, Ava, who is 7 years old now, and from posts and pictures I have seen, she is the apple of a very devoted father's eye. Ameet is the front man for Mahir's Freemasons Without Borders presentations and puts a tremendous amount of time and effort into the detailed preparations and the introductions for these events. He was also the inspiration behind the highly successful and evocative remembrance celebration the province held on the 11th of December. But it is in and across London Mark that Brother Ameet has made a particular impression. Advanced into the MacDonald Lodge of Mark Master Masons in only March 2018, and a founding member of Khalsa Lodge earlier this year, he is now junior warden in both lodges. I can feel a request for a dispensation coming my way already for him to be master of 2 lodges simultaneously. Ameet, your application to our rituals and ceremonies is absolutely commendable. Your grasp of the workings is so evident during your regular attendance of our weekly Grandmaster's Lodge of Instruction practices held by Zoom every Monday since last April. Your knowledge of the words is such that on occasion you have beaten me as preceptor to a prompt for someone searching for the right word. Your enthusiasm is infectious, and your great love of the order was demonstrated last October when you volunteered as one of the team which travelled to the newly formed Mark district of Romania, where amongst other daytime and nocturnal adventures, we advanced the Deputy Grand Master of Romania's craft into one of the new Mark lodges, a lodge we had only consecrated the previous day. Ameet, you are a true supporter of our province. You put your heart and soul into everything that you do and are a commendable ambassador for our order. As a thank you, again from me personally and from our province, it gives me the greatest of pleasure at this special time of year, and when, to be quite honest, we could do with a little cheerful news, to offer you a field first appointment to Provincial Grand Steward. This active office to take effect immediately. In fact, it is so immediate that I can tell you that the Provincial Grand Secretary has already amended Keystone Online to reflect your new Provincial Grand rank. I've signed off a special certificate to commemorate this field appointment, which should be with you in the course of the next few days. Ameet, you have a great future ahead of you in the Mark Degree, and I look forward to seeing you on provincial delegations once Masonry starts up again, and to watching your progress in our beloved Mark degree for many years to come.
Provincial Master, right worship, that's Thomas Quinn. Thank you. I'm speechless, Tom. You've managed to do it
For the first time.
for the first time. Thank you very much. I just hope I can continue to serve you, our London province that you do love so much. And that's what it is, brethren. It is all about service. I'm honoured. Thank you very much. And I hope I can live up to your expectations. Thank you.
And Mahir also, congratulations again to you. I'm sorry to cut you short.
That's absolutely fine. I'm so grateful for the promotion. Virtual Project Grandmaster. What can I say? I'm really speechless. Thank you very much again.
Okay, thank you. Well, what shall we do now, Ameet?
Well, somebody must have known because I've just been handed a glass of champagne.
Yeah.
A well-kept secret, I do think.
Cheers to you all, I guess. Thank you ever so much. None of this is possible with just one man working. It takes a brotherhood, a team. And Tom, you lead from the top. Thank you very much. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Ameet.
Well done.
Well done. Well done, Ameet. Well done, Mahir.
Congratulations, chaps.
Very Merry Christmas to everybody and a happy and successful 20.
Congratulations, both.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, all.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year,
Merry
everyone.
Christmas.
Yes,
And Happy New
everyone.
Year.
Christmas to all.
Merry Christmas.
Happy
Peace
Christmas.
to all.
Brethren,
Well done.
Enjoy the
Christmas, brethren, and congratulations.
Hello, Tony.
Tony.
Merry Christmas, brethren. Merry Christmas, Tom. Merry
Congratulations.
Christmas, David.
Christian,
Hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas and
congratulations.
Happy New Year.
Congratulations to all of you.
Yeah, congratulations, all.
Eat my ear, well done.
Congratulations,
everybody.
Brethren, good night all. Thank you.
Well done, Ameet. Thank you.
thank you, Shane. Merry Christmas.
Congratulations.
Well done.
Congratulations.
Well done, Ameet. Well deserved.
Good night, everybody. Richly deserved.
Good night.
Merry Christmas. Good night.
I'm very
And
pleased
well done.
with your grandmaster
Fantastic.
still drinking the national drink.
That's what it is
Well
too.
done, Ameet.
Thanks, Shane.
Yeah.
Good night, all.
No.
See you both next year. Bye.
Take care.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Ameet,
Merry
does
Christmas,
the
all.
field promotion extend as far as the bar when it's allowed to be open again?
Definitely.
Second that.
I certainly hope so.
Tim, it's certainly will. Just make sure you bring your wallet with you.
Mark Master Mason, yeah.
Ameet, did you want to say
Where's
anything in
the
conclusion?
tie?
Congratulations. That's the mandatory bit, Amy, but buying us all a beer.
I think my hair's announcement first, so I don't see anybody asking him for a drink.
He has to get one for getting into the
I've got my drink, but I don't have a camera.
No, I want to join another order. If I pay for your drinks, I'll be broke.
Yeah, that's the
Hey,
problem.
did you want to say anything in conclusion for this evening's meeting?
I certainly would. Thank you very much, Paul. I did. Brethren, I just wanted to wish you all and your families a very Merry Christmas and a much more prosperous New Year than you had. It has been awful. I'll put everyone on mute. How about that? Yeah, brethren, look, none of this is possible without all of you guys. Mahir started this, we've taken it on and we've turned it into what it is. But look, we are Freemasons without borders. You are Freemasons without borders. And it certainly means a lot to us. We will be back on the 5th of January. We'll be taking basically a deep dive into the Holy Royal Arch. We have a 2-part series starting on the 5th of Jan. Apart from that, brethren, look, have a great time. Enjoy yourselves. I'm always on the end of another phone call. So is Mahir and the rest of our team. If any of you need anything, please feel free, give us a call, drop us an email, and we'll be happy to help.
Thank you very much, Ameet. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas, Ameet.
Bye. Merry Christmas.
Thank you so much.
Christmas, Ameet. Christmas, my hair.
Congratulations, my kid.
Happy Christmas. I'll see you
Yeah.
next
Happy
year.
Christmas.
Merry Christmas, brethren.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
brethren.
Merry Christmas, brethren.
Dozens of messages.
Thank you,
Merry
brethren.
Christmas, everyone.
Messages for you to
Take
read
care.
on
Bye
as well.
Bye bye. Stay safe.
bye.
Yes,
Very
sir.
happy